Have you ever been alone at night during a rainstorm? You think you're safe inside, but what if something else is watching you? Get ready to be terrified with 3 creepy stories from Reddit, all experienced on a rainy night.
This is something I've been meaning to share, because honestly, people need to stay alert and grounded, no matter where they are. To give you some background, I used to live in a really remote part of Canada. The town was small and mostly deserted, with a lot of rundown, abandoned buildings just left to rot after people moved away. Bored out of our minds and with nothing to do, my friends and I made a habit of exploring those forgotten places. Up until this one particular incident, we hadn't experienced anything too out of the ordinary. Yeah, sometimes we'd spot weird things, like what looked like dried blood splatters or symbols like pentagrams scrawled on the floor by whoever had been there before us, but nothing that actually crossed the line into truly disturbing. That is, until the last time I went exploring. See, when I was little, I went to a daycare that, strangely enough, was attached to an old mental hospital. Weird combo, I know. But both eventually shut down due to low numbers. Barely any kids at the daycare, and not enough patients in the hospital. Years later, a few friends and I decided to go back and check it out. I was 15 at the time, and most of my friends were around the same age. When we arrived, it honestly felt like we walked straight into a horror movie. Fog hung low over the ground, the sky was overcast, and a light drizzle had started coming down, just enough to soak our jackets. We made our way to the front gate. It was padlocked tight. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play place and park area with the flashlights that we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos and wood chips from the previous furniture, old torn dolls, and toys thrown about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, till all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room, and I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were in a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested that we go to look and see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of that idea. But with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up to the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor, and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became stronger. With a hint of something else, which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment, we walked in. Our flashlights pointed in every direction, with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and to the right were the occasional metal doorway. Some of doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian let his flashlight into a room. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered. "What is it?" I asked him. I thought I saw someone here, but it seems fine now. To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back, I think he was being completely honest. He backed out of the room, and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward. When another friend swiftly told us to stop, we came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking towards his sounds. We'd considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or someone was in the building. But we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. But finally, we entered a room on the right, which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian lit his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt, stained with what I assumed was blood and torn beige pants. He did not have any socks on, and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the feast?" he asked. This kicked us over the edge, and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open, and we decided to try and slam it shut. But the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It actually took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it, and just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, with his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. We sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation. But we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. About a year after we had gone exploring there, the police returned to the area for a routine sweep, and that's when they found him. Turns out, the man had once been a patient at the psychiatric hospital before it was shut down. After being relocated to another facility, he managed to escape and had been surviving in the woods ever since, living off the land surrounding the abandoned complex. When authorities finally apprehended him, he was in horrific condition, riddled with infections and illnesses from eating raw meat and whatever else he could find. Mentally, he had deteriorated even further, far worse than he had been before. Later, whispers started going around that he may have killed someone deep in the forest during one of his hunts for food, but no official confirmation ever came out. All I can say is, be smart, be safe, and never take places like that lightly. Abandoned doesn't always mean empty. But first, did you know that 98% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed? That means you. And yes, I am speaking specifically to you. Probably aren't. So now would be a great time to leave a like on the video and subscribe. Anyhow, the house I live in is just a few hundred meters from a small church tucked into a quiet suburb. I was raised Christian, but religion never really stuck with me. I only went to that church as a kid, mostly because my parents brought me along. After my dad passed away during my teenage years, we stopped going as a family altogether. Since then, the only times I stepped inside were when friends invited me to tag along. Now I'm 21, and the only time I ever see that church is when I cut through on my way into the city. There's a dirt road that runs right beside it, leading to a back parking lot connected to a main road, perfect for catching a direct bus to work. It's a quicker route than heading to the village gate in the opposite direction, and it saves me from having to transfer buses. I've never been the jumpy type. Fear doesn't usually stick with me, and I don't scare easily, not in any lasting way. But what I saw next to that church 3 months ago, it's something that's still etched into my mind, and no matter how much time passes, it refuses to let go. There had been warnings about a storm earlier that week, but on that early Thursday morning, when I stepped outside for work, the sky was calm, clear, too clear, not a single cloud to cover the starry sky. So, I didn't bring an umbrella. I climbed over the parking lot gate because it was chained shut until 6 for the first Mass. The guard at the outpost didn't mind, because the church staff knew my family pretty well. I work at a hotel as a line cook, and it's a very demanding job. I have to leave home before the sunrise, and most days I work long after it is set. The only time I get to see the sun is if I'm assigned to a station at the buffet, where we have a view to the poolside. It was an average overwork and underpaid kind of day for me. I wasn't assigned at the buffet line. I stayed in the kitchen, where there weren't any windows. So I was surprised to see the flooded streets when I clocked out. Apparently, it had been raining heavily all afternoon, and it subsided around sunset. It was around 8 in the evening when I left the hotel. And in my country, flooded streets meant standstill traffic for at least a couple of hours. This wasn't that uncommon. I had dealt with similar situations before. It also meant I could sleep on the bus, so it wasn't that upsetting. Fast forward to around midnight, and it's pouring out again. I'm not too far off from the church parking lot, so I decided to get off the bus and start walking, because it hadn't budged for the last 10 minutes. I put my phone and wallet in my waterproof backpack, which also contained a spare shirt, my house key, and my knife set. I didn't mind getting wet. Around this time, the parking lot gate was already changed shut, but I climbed over it like I usually do. It was flooded knee-deep in the parking lot, and there was no security guard at the outpost. I figured he retreated into the church. It was really dark, but I focused on the small amount of light coming from the houses in the distance. They really only looked like dots from that far. I trudged my way through the open parking lot. That could have passed as a kiddie pool when I hear this strange sloshing at the far corner to my left. Due to the heavy rain, I couldn't clearly make out what was there, but I knew that I wasn't alone. All the lights to the lot were shut, and the only things to guide me were the few lights of the houses far ahead in my memory of the area's landscape. It's a straight shot from a dirt road, so I didn't have to worry about a light source. The sound of all the falling raindrops accumulated into a dull, static noise, so it was easy for me to hear that there was something going on in that corner. I could see the shape of a person who seemed to be sitting down, so I could only see from the waist up. As I got closer, and my eyes better adjusted to the dark, I could tell that it was a woman because of her long hair and curvy outline. She was flailing her arms and splashing the water around, grunting as she pounded her fists into the water. She was about 2 cars' lengths away, so I wasn't that concerned about it. I've dealt with crazy people before. I glanced over her a few times as I passed her, and then I got to the dirt road. Quite unnerving. She was out of my line of sight at this point, and the mud made it hard to walk. Water was only ankle deep now, but I kept having to jerk my foot free after each step because my shoes would sink in the mud. A small splash made me look over my shoulder, and in the darkness of that dirt road, the woman was splayed out face first in the shallow water. I froze, thinking whether or not I should help her. I truly hated the thought of being the guy who let someone drown in water 6 inches deep. She was about 10 steps away from me, and before I could decide what to do, she started to move. It was too dark to see any details, but her outline was distinguishable enough for me to see that she was looking up at me. She slowly got on her hands and feet, like she was about to stand, but her hands lingered on the grounds. I was already scared, pale at this point. My legs didn't work, and I thought of reaching out for my knives, but I was afraid to move, and then she starts crawling toward me on her hands and feet. This sent a jolt through me, and all of a sudden I'm sprinting toward my house. I could hear the splashes behind me, along with her coarse breathing, almost like she was coughing. My eyes started filling with tears, and the rain against my face made the light in the distant houses blurry. But I knew that at that point I was running for my life. I couldn't tell she was catching up, but I didn't have it in me to look back. I heard her yell in a voice so rough it resembled a pig squeal, short, sharp, and loud. A wordless shout of anger. I believe that was the fastest I ever ran in my life. At this point, I couldn't hear anything but the rain, deafening, unrelenting, and violent. My house was close. I sped by a few houses with their dim porch lights, and I could tell that I was running on asphalt. I didn't know when it happened, but apparently I lost my shoes back at the dirt riding. One last bend, and I was at my doorstep, finally. I forcefully tore my backpack zipper open, and I fumbled around the inside for the key, frantically looking around to see if she was still chasing me. I got in the house and slammed the door shut and collapsed. I don't recall the rest of that night, but when I woke up the next morning in my bed, my older brother filled me in. He was awake when I got home that night and went to the front door when the noise alerted him. He said I was on my knees, leaning against the door, and quietly sobbing to myself. He woke my mom, and they were trying to console me, but I wouldn't talk. They tried to ask me questions, but I would just shake my head. They got me into some dry clothes and led me to my bed. Over breakfast, I explained what happened, and my mom said she'd notify the village guards. I could tell that they were concerned for my safety, but they didn't understand the fear I felt. My brother even joked about it. I never made it to work that day. In fact, I ended up taking the rest of the week off after coming down with a fever. Security did a light investigation, even ramped up their patrols around the area for a while, but they didn't find anything. Nothing, except for my shoes, left behind in that parking lot. Ever since then, I haven't been able to walk anywhere alone without constantly looking over my shoulder. Any sudden noise, especially loud ones, makes my heart jolt. And rain? I can't even bear to hear it anymore. That said, I've been slowly improving. These days, I can at least fall asleep with the lights off. But what I truly wish, more than anything, is that I could stop seeing her, that crawling, distorted shape of a woman that creeps into view just as I start to drift off. I wish I could describe her better. I really do. Because being afraid of something is one thing, but not understanding what you fear, that's when your mind starts filling in the blanks. And what it creates is always far worse than the truth. I had come home for the summer, my first time back in over a year since starting university. Our house sits just outside a small town, surrounded by dense forest in every direction. Not far from home is a small, man-made lake that branches off from a long river winding through the woods. That river splits into several narrow streams, especially east of the lake. Close to the house, there's a narrow, grassy trail that follows one of those streams toward the river. It's a long walk, but it's one I used to take all the time as a kid. I knew that forest like the back of my hand. I even remembered the exact spots where I could cut through the thick trees to rejoin the stream. The trail I used to follow would eventually veer off course. It would slowly curve northwest, pulling away from the water, and then sharply bend westward after a few miles. By that point, the stream would be buried deep within the forest. I'd always break from the trail and head north through the trees, following the stream until I reached the river. From there, I'd walk west along the riverbank until I reached the lake. It's surprisingly easy to lose your bearings in those woods. The landscape isn't flat. It rises and falls unpredictably. And before you know it, you're surrounded by towering trees on all sides. But I've spent countless days exploring that forest, either alone or with my dad, over the course of 18 years. And not once did I ever run into another person out there. This past summer, I went back twice, both times alone. The first time I left in the morning, I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend. Then I cut back into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running my hands in the water, I heard a bell from far away, coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened well, wondered if it was a lost hunting dog, and I started moving towards the sound. But I soon realized it couldn't have been an animal. I could tell the bell was too heavy because of how clear the sound was to be on a collar. I kept moving, and the bell was moving away from me, and it stopped completely after 5 minutes. The stream also wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell that could have been enclosed in a tent or something, and the river was too far still. I thought of everything, but nothing explained the sound, apart from one obvious thing which I just didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. I knew it had to have been a person, but I stopped thinking about it and I just walked on normally until I found a badger, a blooming dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It was fairly fresh. The body was still limp, and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots, but I knew that was something that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream, so had I. So the badger was put there. Maybe killed there. At least decapitated while I was walking that way, I suppose. I don't know, really. but nothing else happened that day. 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer, and the last time ever. I left home at around 6:00 p.m., and I made it to the stream, then walked to the river in an hour. Then I decided to go back to where I came because it was getting late, and it was raining quite heavily. The sun set at around 9:00 p.m. I was walking as fast as I could, with the sound of the rain in the trees being really surreal and loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while through the clearest and most open part of the forest when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with his head strung to the front of his paws, and it was tied up, just swinging from a tree. It was this putrid bag of stench, wet and dripping green liquid. I started gagging. I had some sort of mucus-textured fluid in my hair. It was just repulsive. At first, I just stared at it. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in its juices. I was soaking from the rain. My senses became confused. It felt like a bucket of ice. Cold water had been thrown over me when I realized that I walked the same way to get to the river. So someone had strung up the body after I passed it on the way there. Someone knew that I would see it. So was someone watching me and running around the forest with the faint sounds of branches breaking around me, not animals. I looked around and started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream, back towards the path for a while, when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad while running. I told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turns W. It was the closest part of the path to me, and I told him to go as fast as he could and that someone was in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was just like I shit out my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raised despite being soaked. It was dark, and I jogged as fast as I could. I was panicking because the path was still a bit far away, just too far to feel safe. It was still raining. Every single sound was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for way longer than last time, on and off, and I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I couldn't flip and breathe properly was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I knew I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a damn horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud like a toddler does, tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. But I stayed on the phone with my mom, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mom was also screaming on the phone at the same time that they were on the path and that I needed to run fast. I was as terrified as you could imagine, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half running, half speed walking thing again because I was out of breath. But then I heard branches break and clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest, and the bell ringing louder. I didn't want to, but I looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw what was in the forest with me. A tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. Could tell He was staring straight at me. Now, I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers. When I tell you, I ran for my life. I didn't look back once. I screamed as much as I could. I lied even. I'm on the phone with the police. They're on the path. Dad, I can see you. I'm here. I wanted to yell. Dad, please, where are you? But I kept that part to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen. And I felt like the man was right behind me. I just kept telling myself to not look back. I was gasping for air, sobbing uncontrollably, and screaming out for my dad. In the chaos, I dropped my bag, something I didn't even notice until I was already in the car. At that moment, it felt like my phone was the only thing connecting me to safety, to home. Nothing around me felt real anymore. It was as if my legs were moving on autopilot, carrying me forward without thought. I had no idea if the man was still behind me. All I could hear was the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears and that bell. Then I finally heard my dad calling my name. I could tell he was close. The urgency in his voice told me he could see me. The second we reached each other, I threw myself into his arms. And that's when he heard it too. The bell. Even my mom could hear it through the phone, waiting in the car with the engine running, ready to get us out of there. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing video. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. All right, that's it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.